everyone. This is Zoph, and I'm not being seen for some reason, so this is kind of odd. Um, that's why. There. Now, hopefully everybody can see me. This is Zoph. You are watching Simply SCAdian. No title required. A show that's all about regular folk in the SCA. Nobody has a peerage. Nobody's a court or landed baron and baroness. No former royal peers or current royal peers. Nothing like that. Just regular people that have incredibly amazing, awesome things to talk to us about in the SCA. I'm going to let Lashir is my guest co-host tonight because once again, Lucas is a poopy head and he's really busy with the real world. He's got a job. He's a teacher and it's
Oh,
the end of the semester / school year. So he's doing a lot of stuff, but he's still a poopy head. So, Lashir is the guest co-host tonight. Thanks for being here, Lashir. And why don't you go away and tell us about our awesome guest?
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Yokoso, as we might say in Japanese. This is our guest for this evening. Akiyama Kazuhiko is chatelaine and herald for the barony of Carrickban, comprising DeKalb, Illinois, and surrounding areas. He is public with his trans and queer identities and frequently wears a rainbow samurai kit. He enjoys Scribble, upgrading the research in the SCA, and helping newbies to find their joy. So, let's see. What should we say first? Because
Well,
I'm
first
afraid that I'm still pretty
no,
new.
that's okay. I didn't take you through what we usually ask. So the first question that everybody gets asked is, how did you find the SCA?
two stages. Number one, I had an adult pen pal while I was a child who was in her PhD program while I was in elementary school, and we wrote back and forth. So she would write me letters about being in the SCA, but I have no idea who she was in the SCA. So one day I hope to reconnect with her somehow. So if you know somebody who was mundanely and pre-marriage called Sally Clark from Alabama, I hope to eventually find her.
All right, we're going to put that out. So go ahead.
But I never actually joined the SCA because when I first tried to find the SCA locally, the local group was very unfriendly, which was unfortunate. They were of a particular stripe where financial grandeur was far more important than just getting down to playing. And I think most of us have met a few people like that before, and it was my first experience of the SCA. So I thought, well, I can't be a part of the SCA. Much later, as an adult, while I lived in North Carolina, the Barony of Sacred Stone in Atlantia, I was in a local coffee shop, gaming cafe, and art theater. It was a very cool place. And the local SCA happened to have their meetings in the back room. And my husband and I, new to town, were in our local coffee shop. And we were overhearing people talk about what they were doing that weekend. And we both went, that's interesting. Introduced ourselves, and we all ended up in a conversation about tater herpes, as in the strain of herpes that caused the actual potato famine. And this was enough to show us that these were our people, and we instantly joined up.
Okay, wait a minute. I want to know more. This is something I have never heard of in my life.
Amazing.
Educate me,
Really?
please. Yes.
I mean, there's not much more to say. So there have been several famines in Ireland.
Right.
And the most well-known one was after monoculturing of potatoes led to an enormous problem because this monoculture of potatoes happened to be weak to a particular strain of herpes, which is not a group of viruses that is only limited to humans or, in fact, mammals. And yeah, so that killed a whole bunch of Irish people and led to an enormous influx of American immigrants.
Right. I mean, like I knew about the potato famine, but I didn't know why. So see, look
Yeah,
at that. Everybody can learn something new every single day.
monoculture
Uh,
bad.
so I am so glad that you found a welcoming group, the Barony of Sacred
Yes.
Stone in Atlantia, and then you moved to the Midrealm. What caused you to leave there and go north?
So I was in Greensboro, North Carolina, getting my master's degree in library and information sciences mundanely. Yes, I noticed in your personal bio, Lasser, that you are currently on this hell trek. I will
Yeah.
encourage you a little bit to consider a secondary career as well, because the market is hard.
Yeah, I'm really lucky to actually work mundanely for the DC Public Library currently. Um, yes,
That's
it's
good.
really wonderful, but yeah,
It's a tough
probably gonna
market,
be, yeah.
but I encourage you in your studies nonetheless.
Thank you.
Uh, and so, yes, I'm sure everybody knows that the SCA is just chock full of librarians. I know about 20 that I can think of off the top of my head who are local and librarians. Some of the first people I met in Greensboro were librarians. So it has been professionally rewarding. But the reason I ended up in Mid-Realm is because I got a job at Northern Illinois University. And my job is so cool. I know it's not SCA related, but it's so cool. I am in charge of a grant funded project to scan dime novels, which are 19th century pop mass literature. They're essentially the great granddaddies of comic books. They antecede pulp fiction very directly. And so they're all these super brittle, gorgeous 19th century trashy stories. And I've been doing all this research on queer characters in these stories. So I just presented on how people think that back in the day, homosexuality was looked down on as bad, and we're just getting better and better as we go on because we have a myth of progressivism as a consistent arc in history. But in fact, even in the 19th century, there was a surprising amount of kindness and acceptance for queer characters and queer humans.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
See, this is just something here you go again. Teach me. Like I never, I mean, I had no idea, I guess is all I want to say.
I
Huh.
mean, it's such a huge subject area to talk about, like the history of
Mhm.
marriage, the history of identity, the difference between sexual acts and sexual being. Like the concept of a homosexual didn't really exist until the late 19th century, and even that was kind of fraught and didn't get imported into the Americas until the 20th century. So you weren't a gay person until the 20th century.
Hmm.
You just had tastes, and this is very European.
Mhm.
Although you want to know a fun piece of SCA related queer
Yeah.
history?
Yeah.
All right, so I do Japanese, right? And prior to Western contact, there was a huge prevalence of queer styled relationships, especially between men. Most people know about this, that like between elder and younger samurai or warrior caste, there would be particular relationships that were similar to Greek pederasty, where you raise up the juniors and occasionally have sex with them. And
Mhm.
monks, there was sexual relationships between monks throughout the early days of Buddhism being imported into Japan. And later in period and into the post-period time, you had theatrical presentations where there would be actors, and then you would go and meet the actors, and then you would have sex with the actors because you had a great deal of money, whether they be male or female. Some groups were all female, some groups were all male, and because you're socially mobile, you're a male going to see these theatrical presentations and meeting your favorite actors and boning them. But so there's not a concept of being gay or being homosexual. You just have sexual preferences. But if you were a male person who did not want to have sex with women ever, you weren't considered a homosexual or a man lover. You were considered a woman hater. The term for it, which I cannot generate in my head right now, is literally woman hater. So I guess it starts with Ona. Um,
Odna Kirai, maybe?
I don't think it was Kirai,
Hmm.
because it's not. It's a higher form of dislike.
Oh, wow.
That's why it's translated as hater. So, but yeah. So I find that absolutely fascinating.
I don't know what to say. I do too. Like this is a whole like I knew like obviously living in the mid realm, there's enough people who do Japanese personas that I see and respect, and we had a rain, of course, that had Japanese
Yes.
stuff, and but it's never been anything that piqued my interest, so I never
Mhm.
dove into learning anything about it. So this is your opportunity to teach me and to teach everybody else about, when I reached out to you and asked you to come on, of course, this is Pride Month. Month of
Mhm.
June is
Mhm.
Pride Month. And a friend of mine said, maybe you guys should do an episode or two for the month of June on people who are part of the LGBTQA plus community. And I was like, that's a great idea. And of course, I
Mhm.
immediately thought of you. Immediately
Aw.
was like, I know exactly who we're going to have on. But I think that I just want to state my opinion on this, and it's going to dive into the modern world. But I read a book, a biography by Melissa Etheridge, and it got me really angry because to me, Melissa Etheridge is so much more than her sexual identity. And so I really feel like your sexual identity is awesome and fine, and I really don't care. Like I mean I do, but I don't.
Mhm.
And how can I help you to be more recognized and not be spit on? But it to me, you are a person who just happens to like X, Y, or Z. It doesn't matter to me, and I guess
Mhm.
that's my privilege showing. But I really, my being a bisexual, of course, like I don't care. It just doesn't bother me, and I think that when we say this is blah and this person's gay, I think, well, that is such a small part of this person and what they know and who they are and what they can share with us. So I'm saying it poorly, I know, but what I'm trying to say is that I don't want to just talk about being gay. I want to talk about Japan, and I want to talk about scribal arts, and I want to talk about what it's like,
Mhm.
in your barony, and what you love about the SCA and what you don't love about the SCA. So there was a part of me that was concerned about tokenism when
Right.
I asked you to come on the show, is my really long, poorly worded, rambly way of saying that. I recognize you as a human being, and I think you're incredible and you're awesome and you're inspirational. And I don't want to just be bounded by the month of June, have it be the only time that we talk to people who identify on, in the rainbow.
That big old rainbow umbrella. The the
Yes.
way the way I see it is that, having things like June as Pride Month and having Black History Month is not so that we don't think about these topics all the time anyway, but it gives us the excuse, the reminder to make sure we don't miss over those important parts of society, especially when we're not in them. Um, it'd be real easy for me to go through my life and not think a whole lot about Black history. But February is there with signage and whatnot to kick me in the face and say, "Hey, duh, you know that other people live here, right? And
Right.
other people
Right.
have done cool things, right?" So it's a good reminder time. But
Okay.
if it
Thank you for
comforts
helping
you,
me rephrase that in a way that wasn't so foot and mouthy.
I do not feel tokenized, which is
Okay,
fine. It is
yay.
the right. It is a good time. Um, and also, I'm going to disagree with you slightly.
Okay, go for
So,
it.
you said a thing that I've heard a lot of people say, but I personally disagree with, and that's the "I'm not just my sexuality" or "I'm not just my trans identity." And to that, yes, I agree. But I wouldn't say that I'm so much more, because I'd say that my queerness, my various intersecting identities are a part of everything I do. It is everything I am. I don't stop being queer while I'm doing Scribble. I don't stop being queer while I'm doing performing arts. And I can only do those queerly. I am incapable of performing non-queerness in any part of my life. So I am never more than, well, perhaps I'm more than, but there's no part of my life that is absent those
Right.
identities.
And yes, that I do agree with. So thank you.
I figured you did, but it's hard to parse because you're getting into some deep philosophy there.
I like that though. I'm a very deep philosophizer.
Me too.
Okay, so let's just dive right in and talk about being gay, being trans in the SCA. What is that, especially coming from the South to which is more openly anti, to coming to the North, which is more closeted anti, but still anti.
Yeah.
What's the experience been like for you as a SCAdian?
I'll tell you a funny story to start. When I was early in the SCA in my first year down in North Carolina, and I got called up for my first award, I had no beard. I had not yet been able to access hormones because I lived in North Carolina and you can't do crap in North Carolina. Um, and so I don't quite know the etiquette, but I realized that I should try and like respectfully walk into court. And this big burly white belt wearing bald dude runs up and grabs my arm to escort me into court. And I'm like, "Oh, do we just get escorted? That's what, maybe it's cuz he's like a knight or something. Okay, we get escorted by knights. That's what we do." And everyone who knew me is cackling in the seats because they know I'm a gentleman. I just don't quite look it yet. And I don't understand that he is escorting a lady into court because we're going to do this all kind and genteelly and binary sexually. So that was fun. And I was very embarrassed by the end of it, but
Oh,
I got over it. Um Part of early in the SCA being queer. Like this is about, oh my god, have I been in the SCA this long? Oh my god, I think that would have been like 2012, 2013. I thought I was still like in year 5 or something.
I'm coming up on year 30. Anyway, go
I'm
Go
um
ahead, you whippersnapper.
so there's a thing people say about coming out, that you never get to come out once. You have to come out over and over and over and over. So a lot of that first year was having to not only introduce myself to new people every single time, but also then immediately disclose anything about my identities if I wanted to not be called Milady all day. So the SCA being a recreationist society where some people like are very invested in like the pomp and the circumstance, and generally I'd say that's a good thing, carry the baggage of the time period's binarism with them. And so when they are performing in a very positive sense, SCA lords and ladies, it's very lords and ladies. So there isn't automatically a lot of room for um, diversion from that, which is particularly funny since there's so many of us who play in history places that don't necessarily have those binaries in the same fashion, or where status would have you assigned an identity first, before gender would. Like, there are plenty of societies in which the address for a servant is the same regardless of gender, or the address for somebody who does a job is without gender. I'm rambling, I apologize. But I find it interesting that societally the SCA has settled on this fantasy pseudo-European idea of how we interact with each other, as like a agreed upon main ground. And honestly, you know how I said I can't do anything unqueerly? I honestly think part of my interest in Japanese persona is queering SCA space. It is stretching the bounds of what the SCA could do. Because when I was down in North Carolina, in Atlantia, everybody is Viking. Everybody's maybe some English, some French, but it's all European. There were like 5 Japanese kids I knew down there. So yes, I am placing my foot here and saying Japanese in the SCA is queer. There.
I love it. That's
I love
awesome.
this. I want to embroider it on something, like
Do
very
it.
little banner.
Do it. All right, Lucia, do you have any questions? Because I've been like sort of rambling.
No, you're fine. It's really like this being my first time, I really appreciate sort of the space to be able to like play and goof up a little bit.
Aw.
But yeah, I thank you again for being on here. It's really great to sort of like hear these perspectives as well. You know, I personally, I know I came into the queer sort of identity like as a teenager, and then for me personally, it's been sort of like a wibbly wobbly rainbowy kind of thing since then. And that's okay. So from that perspective, for me, I also have to say too, I've been in the SCA for about 16 years myself. I got started kind of young. So with that in mind, I know what my own experiences have been, but do you think that like the SCA in general has become a more queer space, or a space at least that's friendlier to those of us who identify as such?
It's complicated. In one sense, yes, and in another sense, no. In the first sense, there are 2 main shifts that I've noticed in my sphere. The one has to do with overall culture moving forward, in that, and by culture I mean like national culture, as well as even just like nerd culture in general being kind of a bastion for progressive politics and therefore welcoming of queer people. So as that has grown outside of the SCA, I think that has permeated into the SCA. And in the other, like very locally, my barony is currently ruled by 2 barons. They're not romantically involved. One is a married heterosexual gentleman who plays Japanese, and the other is an out trans man who plays Rus Viking. But they both have, you know, like intersections of oppression, blah de blah, and so they are more conscientious of being welcoming. And so my immediate barony has been like hyper focused on being more inclusive. But, and here's the big but, there's also a portion of the SCA that is in the SCA because they don't like the movement of progress. And as it's a hobby, I can't really fault them for it. They want their hobby to be their hobby. But that also means that I have to interact with people who, in the real world, are working to harm me directly. So that's what I mean when I say it's complicated. There's really good stuff, and there's stuff that is not good for me. But I try and make myself very visible and present and friendly, so I can improve the bad parts as I encounter them. I might get tired eventually.
I completely understand that. Yo, yes.
Yeah.
It's the truth. It's, you know, it is a lot of work. Like, it is a lot of work, especially because like all of us sort of invest so much in the hobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know like there's sort of this phrase to me, which is like a key phrase, and it's like the Middle Ages as they should be. Right?
Yes.
So I know
with
Me
plumbing and less
anyway, that
racism.
means thank you. Yes. Oh my goodness.
And antibiotics.
Good God, yes, and vaccines.
No.
Yes.
Germ theory, like an acknowledgement of germ theory.
Yeah.
But yeah, like yes, all of that I think I agree with. Like that's been my observation too. So with all of that in mind, like what would we say to, like, a queer youngling functionally who seems like they would, be interested in the SCA? Like how do you think would be the best way to sort of welcome them in?
So, like with any person who joins the SCA, you find out what they're into and you bring them to that interest. When I'm doing chatelaine stuff, I'll do things like when I'm introducing myself, I use my pronouns to indicate this is a place where you can communicate pronouns and it's not weird. And I talk about being who I am and things that I'm into, which will tend to help other people be able to volunteer their interests. I generally think that's better than asking the person, "What do you like? What do you want to do?" And like that can shut people down pretty quickly when they don't know the right answer to say, or what is the most obvious answer. Another thing that I think is really important is that good old representation thing. Part of the reason why I was so comfortable in my first barony is that one of the first people I met was a person who, at the time, presented as a gay man and is now officially out as gender fluid and non-binary, but a male-bodied person, male-appearing person, doing beautiful knitting work, and being like very openly queer. So I knew it was a safe place to be. Whenever we do demos, I tokenize my black baron and say, "You're gonna stand out there in the front and be friendly. It's one of your jobs as baron, I'm sorry." Just to make sure that people know maybe we're not white supremacists just because we like medieval stuff.
Right.
If I know like a kid is queer, I will ramble about like queer history, so they don't feel like history is against them. As particularly as gay people, well, as I'm using gay as the umbrella term, but as the whole acronym rainbow, one of the key elements is that we don't have ethnic families to teach us our history. Like if you are Irish by descent, your family probably knows some Irish stories to tell you. If your family came from like tailors, maybe you have some tailor history in your family. But when you're gay, none of your parents are necessarily gay. None of your grandparents are necessarily gay. Most of us have like an uncle, but you're not guaranteed that through line to pass that history. So more than any other like group that you can really look at, there's a break between young queer people and what they know of the past. So this is the thing that the SCA is particularly good for, is being able to reconnect young queer people to the fact that we've always been here. We've had different struggles through history, but we have always been here. And there are cool ones of us you can learn about, including kings and crap.
So one of the questions we usually ask, and I still want to dive into your other interests in the SCA too, but coming at it from what we've been talking about, what can the SCA do to be more welcoming? What do we need to do? What are growth points?
Oh God, how much time you got?
We have 20 minutes left.
So some are structural, some are very local, and a lot of it is one-on-one. People who are in positions of power have a big responsibility to be cultural leaders, as it were, on improving points of culture. I don't want to get too finger pointy in this kind of informal space. But there are certain portions of the SCA that have a tendency toward less inclusive spaces. Like I've seen textile crowds that were a little weird about male type people, or saw themselves as female only spaces and would maybe exclude trans women. But more than that, I've seen a lot of bad culture among certain fighting groups. This is not fighters are bad. This is there is a preponderance of a negative culture in some groups of fighters that emphasize the usual, like, mundane toxic masculinity, and that tends to kick out or de-incentivize women fighters and any of the gender minority groups, even when the fighters themselves aren't saying, no, you can't play with us, you're a girl. That's not really a problem. I haven't really seen that at all. What I have seen is a bunch of big dudes getting together and being proud of all their bruises and hurting each other, which, in addition to not being good for them, is going to be very damaging for people who are of smaller or slighter bodies. Is very painful for people who have chronic illnesses but are still interested in the skills that go along with heavy fighting. The fighting in most of the kingdoms is about the honor and the function of the sport, rather than actually hurting the other person enough to make them stop moving. But as with most sports, there is some emphasis on wanting to mostly be physically tough. And that comes with it, or that tends to bring along with it, that sort of baggage. So there are things like that throughout the SCA, and that's going to be the case throughout all activities in all of culture. But I hope that people who are our leaders, that being the royal sets, as well as the officers like seneschals and whatnot, or if like heads of guilds, I think these people generally have the opportunity to have that authority behind them to say, well, let's do it this different way, and during their tenure help grow and nurture healthier cultures. And I think that's much better than like society putting up a set of rules, because that's good, except that means like 30% of people who see that rule are going to go, well, that's not a problem and you're just making stuff up, and they'll resist it. So I would rather people like work together to have a better place for all people than us come down hard on perceived malactors, typically. So that's the big one, but that's also very hard. It is hard to change culture. But other things, there's like lots of niddly griddly points at society level in our like our laws and whatnot, and how our board operates that are less than transparent. I mean, a lot of people talk about this. I'm hardly the only person to have been clever and noticed. So there's a lot. There's a lot, but as long as the arc is upward, I think we're going to be okay.
I agree. I am gonna totally shift focus now.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, so I want to talk about what you do besides being awesome in the SCA. So you do scribal arts. What got you into doing the scribal thing?
I mean, I'm queer, so I do art. This okay, I'm going to say a terrible thing, but it's a quote, okay? It's a quote.
Okay.
But it's a really good quote. It's from a Mel Brooks movie that is a remake of a World War II era movie.
Wow, love that
And
one.
okay, yes. So basically, the Nazis are exterminating everybody in this theater, and the theater is trying to keep going. And so one of the characters says, "Well, they're killing everybody, but without the Jews, the queers, and the gypsies, there is no theater." So
Yes.
yes, my husband is an artist, and he's actually quite talented. So while he's doing like the professional stuff, I tend to stay out of it. But in the SCA, I can just play. And so I like doing scribal work. I as a librarian and as a conservator of books, I love studying material objects and material culture. So part of what I like best about doing scribal is learning just the touch and the feel of period materials. So I focus on pergaminata, vellum. I haven't gotten into many period pigments yet. I'm still at books and bookbinding and what thread and wax and various inks can do. And mostly I just otherwise use gouache. So that's what I enjoy in
So
scribal.
that is all. You just said some really nice words. Like
I like
I know some of those things, like the
I like
vellum.
books a lot.
Okay, thanks. Well, explain to people who are not into the scribal arts, smart Alec. I'm gonna drive out there today and smack you.
Hey, I'll get to see you.
I know, right? That's not a threat. That's not the threat I wanted it to be. Explain. So, do you do illumination, calligraphy, both?
So my big favorite thing to do is bookbinding. But while I'm doing that sort of thing and working with those materials, I might as well serve my populace as well and do scrolls when I need to, or I'll do like just scroll art, just as gifts for people. I like researching a particular period or piece and then using that as an inspiration to create a new thing. I did a couple of Book of Kells pieces for my husband. We both like the book Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, so I made two pieces based on that book of the two main characters, but in Book of Kells style, with different quotes in scribal.
Okay, so I totally want to see this now. You have to take a picture and send
my
it.
God.
Okay, all right, they're downstairs, so I'd have to like go
No,
get them.
take a
But,
picture. Yeah.
I like shiny things, so I like playing with gold and silver, though there's less of that in period just because of the poundability of silver and silver-like colors. But I like it.
So, what's the difference between, I'm going to say it wrong, is it pergamata?
Pergaminata?
Pergaminata and vellum. So, like, I've heard
Yeah.
these words before, but I tried once and you really don't want me to draw anything. Like, this is Zoph saying right now, you do not want me to draw. My stick figures look like they're drunk. It's not you want me to
Drunk
tell
stick
you a
figure sounds
story,
like a good comic.
sing a song, do a dance, play my ukulele, I am down, but I don't draw. So explain to me, newbie, not knowing much except I go, ooh, that's a pretty scroll. What's the
Okay.
difference between pergaminata and vellum?
So you know the word parchment, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people think that parchment is called parchment because it's dry. It's not. It's because it was developed near a town that, when gone through a few dialects, sounds like parchment. So the type of hide paper that was made in this town is what we call parchment. And that is a treated and dried skin of a goat, typically, but also cow, and also in some cases sheep. Anything with a large amount of uninterrupted flesh without a bunch of bins in it, so bigger animals. And you can look up videos for how those are made. Parchment is the thinnest version. Okay?
Okay.
The thicker version that is less hard is called vellum. Vellum is also a word that post period gets applied to a crap ton of other stuff. If you see like a pad of paper that is marked vellum in your art supply store, that is not what is thought of as vellum medievally. Vellum is about yay thick, typically. I mean, there's a lot of variances, but all that matters is that it have some bend left in it. Um, and if you've ever heard of a limp bound book, or you see like old timey paperback from back in the day that like bends, that's typically a vellum cover. It is a type of leather. But it takes ink still rather well. So for a certain period of, well, here's a big word for you, incunabula, which means
Gosh.
any books from the time period of the early days of the printing press or printing process. That's incunabula.
Okay.
So you'll see a lot of books that have like this pale leather binding with faded black ink on it, usually in hand. Probably just numbers because it's numbered in the series of where it belongs on the shelf. And those are vellum bound books. The thinner forms of vellum could also be used as pages, but mostly they were exterior pieces.
So, okay, so if you're making a scroll from someone, what's the difference for you?
I'm almost there.
Okay,
Well,
sorry.
we're not done yet. We haven't gotten to pergamonata.
Okay, go ahead.
So pergamonata is more closely aligned with the name of the town that parchment came from. So pergamonata emulates parchment and is from the same place, but is made of vegetable fibers. So the thing that is pergamonata behaves, looks, and takes ink or paints more closely than parchment. Now you can still get parchment, but it's extremely expensive. Pergamonata is manageable.
Gotcha.
Oh.
All right, so now what is gouache?
Gouache is a group of pigment paints that are water soluble, so you don't need like turpentine. It's not an oil base. Watercolor is like a thinner, finer version. Gouache is a paint that behaves sort of halfway between tempera and watercolor.
Okay. So all that being said, that was my education for the day. See, look, even almost 30 years in the SCA, I've just never had anybody that I just always sort of go, when they talk about it.
I like nerding out about
Because
materials.
I've never had anybody that I've really had a chance to ask about, and I'm sorry to take our time up with my novice illumination scribal arts questions.
Thank you for letting me nerd out.
So the hardest thing for me to ever grasp about the whole thing is that you don't get reimbursed. Like it
Right.
is not an inexpensive hobby you have, and you just make a scroll and just, hi, I spent $12 on the materials for this. Here you go.
Yeah.
S-
Is there a question?
No, I'm just really still shocked about that. Like it's like for me, I mean, I guess I kind of understand it. My art is not a tangible art, it's a visual performance art. And it doesn't take away from the hours of studying I've done and the hours I spend writing a story, researching a story on top of I've been performing since I was 16, so I have that actress experience, right? So those are all non-tangible things. I didn't just go out and get some pergamonata and
So
make
here's
a
my
thing.
question for you.
Yeah.
So if I didn't give people my scroll work, that'd be like you not having an audience.
Right. I know. No, I get it,
So,
but
but you
it's
buy
just
your instruments.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
No, nobody pays you for that.
Well, actually, my ex-boyfriend bought it for me, but anyway.
That's different. My husband buys my pergamonata.
So, how does the scribal arts that you do then tie into, and I think you've really kind of answered this, into your modern career?
I mean,
Like, they are in many ways the same, especially with the current project that you're doing for work. But how has being a librarian helped you in the Scribal arts is maybe a better way to ask that.
So most libraries have some collection in their rare books and special collections of period things. And my library specifically has not only a small collection of illuminated leaves that I can go look at specifically with my hands that I touch, that I can go look at whenever I want, but we also have a really notable collection of Southeast Asian illuminated manuscripts that are so cool. I have no way of telling you how cool these are, and they're incredibly rare. It is one of our really notable collections. And illuminated manuscripts from Southeast Asia, and this is, I think, the vast majority is from the region of Burma, but also Thailand and a number of other smaller nations. Micronesia, I think, is one of.
Oh, wow.
So what these look like are they're palm leaves that are all cut to the same size, and then they have holes drilled in the side. So if you were like looking at the leaf, you'd have a leaf there, or a hole there and a hole there, and they have string going through. So on each side. So instead of opening the book with string in the middle, string's on the side, and so you slide it like a fan. So it becomes a large flat piece instead. And each of these palm leaves are then lacquered heavily, and then have different colors of lacquer or carvings to be text and image. And one of the coolest of these is a book of magic tattoos and what they mean in, a language I can't read. But they're so beautiful, and they're so cool. One of my other favorites is a 16th century book of Italian witchcraft that I can almost read because it's in 16th century Italian, which is pretty darn close to Latin, and I've got 6 years of Latin under my belt, so I can muddle through it. So that's really cool. So yes, I frequently will go just pawing my way through what I can when I have time. I can also arrange with our curator special days for my local SCA group to visit with the materials and talk about their history and again, touch them. Here's another fun fact. No white cotton gloves. That's a lie. The movies are lying. You use white cotton gloves for film and photography. But it is much better to use bare, clean hands for almost all other materials.
Nicolas Cage done served me wrong.
I know. Can you believe that movie had some historical inaccuracy in it?
No!
It's shocking.
No!
Oh.
Okay.
That is so cool.
That is such. This is
Man.
like sucks because we have 3 minutes to go because we tried to end by 9, although we did start a little late.
I'm sorry.
No, we're good. So looking at the SCA, one of the questions we do ask, and we talked about growth points from a gay rainbow umbrella term viewpoint, but I think in general, if you could fix one thing in the SCA, what would you fix?
Disability access.
Amen.
I mean, hands down.
Sorry.
That one's easy. The number one reason people stop playing is that they start getting old, and then it's hard to hike all over an event site, or they can't see the screen, or they can't hear court, and it's no longer fun. And these are places where we really can change things well. For the event that I'm co-autocrating with my spouse coming up, Ragnarok Rampage in August. Make a plan to be there. We're doing both digital and physical. Our plan is to ensure that the first row of court is reserved for people with hearing problems or who otherwise need to be closer. We're going to talk with their excellencies and make sure that anyone who is getting an award and has mobility issues can be close to the front, and all that business. That's a small thing that we can do to make people's lives easier. There are several activists on disability services throughout the SCA. The DeCrane sisters, who are in the Shire of Dark River here in the Mid-Realm, are the ones I know nearby. But there are lots of opportunities to take in SCA classes on how to improve access for disabilities and any other physical or inclusion issues. So that is the number one thing that I'd hit first, because I encounter things that make me cringe or individual people that make me feel unsafe. But if you're disabled and your event site isn't accessible, you can't play at all.
Right.
So I think that is the more important one to hit if we have to prioritize.
So what would that look like though for, like, I'm thinking of an outdoor event, which right now everything has to be outdoors, of course. Would that involve golf carts?
Yep, our event is renting a golf cart that we're having staffed throughout the entire time of the event with a standard loop. Golf Wars, pretty famously, has a really good public transportation system. I've never been, but I've had it reported back to me that they even have like a golf cart schedule, so and pickup stops, so you know where to go to get from point A to point B. When we're selecting sites, we need to be really conscious about unevenness of ground and what things we put in what areas, so who can go see them. So if you stick archery over the hill and through the woods, nobody's gonna go except the archers who can walk it.
Right.
And that leaves the archers without enthusiastic participation as well. So there's a lot that we can do to, without extra enormous cost to ourselves, can still do to improve people's lives. So, like, I know that like a 1-day picnic event maybe can't afford a golf cart. So if you can't, then pick your site to be somewhere that's as flat as possible with at least 2 spaces of good parking for the 10 people who show up who can't walk it.
Right. I'm going to just shout out my biggest pet peeve, which is people who do not have a disability who use the disability porta-johns. Don't do that, people. Don't. Just don't. You can use the other ones. If there's other reasons, like back when I was much, much larger, I had to use them because I couldn't fit into a regular porta-john. But that's a form of a disability. But I see these skinny people running into with no, running around the site, and then they run into one of those, and I'm like, dude, just go to the one next door. Go to the one next door.
If that one's full and they're gonna be quick,
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But it's
but
yeah.
I take your meaning. When
It's
you
like
want it just
doing
because it's
shout-
bigger, that's less cool.
What, Lucia?
No, sorry. I was just going to say, if we're doing shout outs about accessibility, like one of my favorite things has actually been like SCA signs. It's been wonderful. And I
Love
really
that.
loved like, oh, it's so cool. I love it. Like it's a wonderful blend of both like functional ASL as well as like signs, created for the specific purpose of the SCA. I think it's really great.
Agreed.
I have a lot of trouble glomming on to learning ASL. I've got my letters, and I've got some animals, and I have some rude words. You want to know my favorite rude word?
Sure.
It's bullshit. So this is a bull, right? So this.
Wait, no, is that really sign language to do that?
This is for real sign language to say
I
bullshit.
knew that. So wait, I know. Peanut butter. Wait, no, is it like that? Yeah, peanut butter. I think
Yes.
peanut butter, is that what it is? Or you are cute. That's right.
Oh,
Cute.
my.
That's cute. Is it anyway? Yeah, no.
It's 2. It's 2.
Peanut butter. Is it 2? Anyway, so we are totally out of time.
It's been awesome getting to chat with
It
you.
has been really great, and we could have talked for another 30 minutes, so maybe we'll have you back on. So we are, Lucas and I have been talking about having theme shows because this is, I think we're going to be wrapping up our season now and taking some time off, and probably coming back in September with season 2 because this is our 10th episode, believe it or not. So but we're not going away. We're not gonna stop just because the pandemic is over. The show will be continuing. But we're talking about different themes, and I think it'd be really great to have a LGBTQ, the gay rainbow of episode. I can never remember all the letters. Sorry, I'm old.
LGBT is fine as long as you got that plus sign.
I have the plus sign is always in my head.
Yeah.
LGBT
plus.
Okay. So we'll be reaching out though because I think we're going to definitely do a pride show. I think is the best way to put it. So
I know a lot of cool people from around the SCAdian.
And that's what we want. We want more people from Lucas and I are in the mid-realm in the east, and although we've gotten some Atlanteans, like our lovely co-host Lucier, and shout out to our guest co-host Opal the cat, who is showing up throughout.
And all cats are queer. That's just
obviously.
So, but we don't have people from that many other kingdoms. So we're trying to get people. So if you have recommendations, and this is to the audience as well as to both of you, please recommend people from other kingdoms. We'd love to get guests on from all over the known world. Again, the only stipulation, this is simply SCAdian, no title required, which means no peers, no landed or court baron and baronesses, no royal peers, no one like that. Just regular folk in the SCA. Thank you so much for talking with us. It has been an honor, and I'm going to do it. Here we go. Akiyama Kazuhiko. If I just look at it, then I can say it. But if I look at the phonetic, I can't say it. Akiyama Kazuhiko. Thank you so much. It has been a really, really wonderful, wonderful honor to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having this show and for having me.
Yay.
Pleasure getting to meet you, Lucier.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
And again, you've been watching Simply SCAdian, no title required.